You're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup with me, Roisin de Cleric.
And me, Paul Brophy.
And Paul, we are turfing it again tonight.
We are indeed, Roisin, and we're joined by a good friend of the programme here on the Irish Political Roundup, Patrick O'Neill, to discuss all things agriculture and food. Of course, Patrick is a beef farmer here in Kilkenny, and he is also a former Fine Gael County Councillor on Kilkenny County Council, and he is also a former general election candidate for the party in 2020. In over the next couple of weeks, a lot of big decisions are going to be made in Europe that are going to impact our farmers. So, Patrick, you're very welcome to the Irish Political Roundup.
Thanks for having me again, Paul. Happy to be here.
And
Yeah,
Patrick, the farming industry, and not an awful lot has happened. The Mercosur deal, we'll start off with that. What's happening there, and how's that affecting the farmers?
If you look, it's kind of where it has always been in reality. It still hasn't been passed. I suppose a bit of context on this, I think this deal has been going back nearly over 30 years at this stage, I believe, in its inception, and still hasn't actually got over the line within Europe. So basically it's a trade agreement from multiple sources between the EU and some South American countries. And yeah, look, there's multiple different things that are involved in it in trade. So obviously, like a we scratch your back, I scratch your back kind of deal. Um, and so agriculture is obviously a key aspect of that, and like particularly Brazil would have a huge beef industry, and there is part of that deal that is going to allow for certain tonnage of South American beef to enter into the EU. And the concern, obviously, with Irish farmers would be that if all this beef comes in, it can obviously affect the market and lower prices. And the other side of that is then, the standards that the EU make Irish farmers and other EU farmers jump through from a, red tape and bureaucracy perspective doesn't actually go on in the likes of Brazil and these countries. So, it's kind of very hypocritical, I suppose, farmers looking in from the outside going, well, you want us to literally do over we're overburdened with bureaucracy and trying to keep things right, but you're willing to take in maybe 100,000 tons of South American beef that doesn't meet anywhere near the same regulations and quality standards that we have to meet. So it's there's so many different little things there that are obviously bad for Irish farmers and leave a bad taste in the mouth potentially. I believe there's a vote due in the European Parliament before the end of this month on this deal again, and I believe it needs all member states to support. And to date, they've never been able to achieve that. And whether they're any closer to achieving that now, I'm not sure. But it's going to be a very interesting couple of weeks ahead for Irish farmers in particular, due to the nature of, I suppose, what we do here as an industry.
And
Patrick,
right,
sorry, Roisin.
consumers, we also want to support our Irish farmers. We don't mind paying for good quality food that are nutritious and healthy. So we want to support the farmers, and we want good meat as well. Because we're the best meat in the world.
Yeah,
Yeah, what we have is a very special product, and it's done to the highest standard. And how our animals, the whole system here in Ireland, the green image, everything that goes along with it, like you can't get it really anywhere else. Obviously the UK is somewhat similar, and parts of northern France and other areas would have a similar kind of climate. But it's unique, and it is, no matter what others would say, it is a very environmentally friendly way of producing food, and that gets a bit forgotten about compared to food production in Brazil, and cattle production is clearing rainforests for land use and all these kind of things, which is the complete opposite effect of all the stuff that's going on from an Irish farm perspective, from an environmental side of things. And we're willing to take in all this beef from South America, which is a fair chance a lot of rainforest has disappeared in order to grow these farms. Like, as far as I'm aware, these farms are growing in South America. The beef trade is something to see as a big industry into the future. And, and we have created a shortage in Europe. You can see that through the beef price at the moment and blue tongue outbreaks. Like the beef price has never been as consistently good in my lifetime. But, you know, we don't like there's a shortage in Europe of beef because of environmental measures that have come in have meant we've destocked a lot of cattle all across Europe. And, now you see other countries who maybe don't necessarily care as much or have the same moral high ground when it comes to the environment are starting to build their beefers, starting to do all this stuff and trying to fill the gap of what we've created by, I suppose trying to be, the best in class when it comes to the environment and targeting agriculture maybe as a focus, which has always been, in my opinion, has been the wrong route to go down, considering the world's population is growing and food is going to be required to feed all these people. And the more animals you lose and the more land you take out of agriculture, that's going to really hamper the future food production for all these people.
And Patrick, within the Mercosur agreement, I believe there is kind of some protections for farmers if uh, South American beef comes in and it potentially can drive down the cost of beef here in Europe and in Ireland. Do you think those protections are enough? Because I was reading the IFA are not fully convinced about that.
Well, look, from what I can see on the potential supports, I think they wouldn't be if particularly in a worst case scenario, they wouldn't come near enough to replace the losses that Irish farmers could endure on the back of some of this beef potentially coming in. And look, you don't know what way the market is going to react to this anyway. Like there is a possibility that this beef comes in and has no effect on the Irish beef trade because there's other factors there that might keep the price high. But there is a fair possibility that, you know, supermarkets or buyers will look for maybe this cheaper option and will cause then, Irish producers having and factories maybe having to drop their price. You don't know what way it's going to materialize. Like, but in fairness, the likelihood is in any market, if you have more product, it's going to drive down price. That's just the nature of, and are consumers on a large scale going to support buying a better product? I think you can see in reality, 80% of consumers are possibly not going to do that. So it's, it is most likely going to be a problem if, all this beef comes in kind of at their will. And the supports there then I think are broken down to like if the beef price drops like 10% each year over a 4 or 5 year period, that there'll be certain payouts given. But it's not going to make up for the losses that farmers would potentially make. So you see it at the minute. Beef price is absolutely fantastic. Great. Everyone is happy. But the guys trying to buy cattle back, your money it's literally decision time now. Do you spend twice the money you might have spent on cattle for your whole life, basically, in a year, or, even buying calves, which you're going to have to keep for 2 years, spend double, probably treble even the calf price next year,
Yeah.
potentially, for waiting 2 years down the line, see what's going to happen. You don't know what way beef price is going to be in 2 years. Let's say the market gets flooded with Brazilian beef. There you go. Price drops. Beef farmers lose crazy money and have nowhere to go. And how did they get out of it? How did they then restock and replenish? And
Yeah.
the whole market becomes a disaster. Like even good prices are great, but they have a consequence as well for the guys trying to buy animals back, because your profit is quickly eaten up into buying keeping animals on the farm. So it's it's a bit of a double-edged sword.
And as you said before, Patrick, beef farming is very, very different to dairy farming. You might have a cow or a calf and you mightn't sell it for months and months, whereas the dairy farmer, there's always milk going out, so there's always an income coming in that way. But whereas a
Yeah.
beef farmer, it's very, very different.
Yeah, to be fair to the dairymen at the minute, things are not good from a dairy perspective. The price is really starting to drop, and dairy farmers are definitely feeling the pinch more than ever. And it's not a good time for milk prices. And it doesn't look great for the next little while either. Like the beef price obviously gone the other way. And like in the past, I suppose maybe dairy farmers have been looking at their calves. It was a bit of a byproduct in a certain way. And, they were just happy for someone to take them. They didn't necessarily look for a premium price for their animals because they just needed the space and needed the animals gone because cows were calving non-stop probably at that time of the year. Whereas now, with the milk price down, you know, a lot of those farmers are, you know, we have a premium product here. We have a calf. We're going to look for that premium price now to maybe fill the void of the milk price. And that then is going to have a knock-on effect on the beef farmer. Like, do they take that risk? Do they buy animals at that price when you have to, you know, literally have to keep them alive for 2 years at
Mm.
least? And the thing is with calves, you know, buying in dairy calves is a tricky thing. I do it here every year. You know, calves, like any, you know, like a child, can get sick very easily. You have to watch them very closely. You know, health
Mm.
issues can, you know, a bad health issue could go through and you could lose three, four, five animals in a short period of time if you're not on top of everything. And then there's your, you know, that's the whole potential profit gone from that bunch of animals if you have an outbreak of something. So you're constantly, you know, up to a year, up to a year of age, you could say, there's a huge potential because they're more susceptible to worms, they're more susceptible to pneumonias, all these kind of things that can have knock-on effects on a calf's health. Once they get over the year mark, they kind of build up resistance to a lot of these things, and they can, you know, it's there's less risk, but you can never take your eye off things. But you know, that period from birth to 1 year old is a real dangerous period for any animal. And you know, if you're spending a lot of money buying in young stock and you're going to have high vet bills, if there's an outbreak of something, if in best practice you're going to vaccinate for multiple different things. So you're going to spend a lot of money on those vaccinations to try and keep out a lot of these diseases. So by the time, you know, for example, you're likely to spend at the moment €800 for maybe a month, 6 week old calf. And that would be, you know, a middle of the road calf, you could say. You're going to feed them in their lifetime a ton of meal. That's 300 or 400 quid. You're buying straw, you're feeding silage, your fertilizer, your own overhead costs, your machinery costs. Like, by the time you're ready to sell that animal, you're quickly going to be into €2,000 maybe potentially in everything. So, you know, up to 9, 10 months ago, an average animal at 2 years of age was maybe making 15, 1,600 quid in a market or factory. So if you see beef price drop back even €2 a kilo, everyone's going to lose maybe €400 a head per animal. And you know, how does someone keep going with that kind of loss? And everything that comes from Europe is, you know, subsidies are being taken away slowly but surely. Everything's being pushed into environmental measures. Let's say, you know, farmers have to do more for the environment more so than food production, which, look, I understand, but farmers would do a lot of this stuff anyway without necessarily being paid for it if they were just treated with a bit of respect, maybe. And you know, it's there's huge challenges. Like, while beef price is good, there's huge fear in the industry from a farmer perspective as how, because you think of it, a lot of the guys who, you know, so many young farmers got into dairy farming and, you know, understand why they did that. At the time, beef farming was, you know, poor. You know, suckler farming was not something that there was a real. If you were a suckler farmer, you needed an off-farm job. That's basically, I'd say there's 10% of maybe suckler farmers that work full time as a suckler farmer. You know, so whereas now, you know, and a lot of guys then that keep cattle or buy calves are older. They're like, yeah, they're doing it more so as a hobby at this stage, you know, as of their lives. They don't have maybe huge overheads at home, their mortgages are paid, their family are reared, and it's something just to keep things going and keep the farm going. But are they going to want to risk by spending huge money in investing into these animals when there's no guarantee of what the price is going to be down the tracks? Like, so it's while things are good, there's a concern that it's too good and that things then will blow up at some stage and farmers will be left with serious losses. And you know, if that happens, it has knock-on effects everywhere in local communities from a spending perspective. You know, there's huge knock-on effects. But look, we'll take the good while we have it. But it's yeah, there's always fear there that something can go wrong and drive everything the other way as well.
Yeah. And a couple of weeks back, Pat, there was about 2,000 farmers. They attended an IFA meeting. It was on the subject of the nitrates derogation, which Ireland has currently from Europe. Now, the current one is due to expire the 31st of December uh, this year. The fact that there was 2,000 people at a public meeting, that'll tell you how big an issue this is for the farming community.
But like in particular, you know, dairy farmers in particular, it's
Yeah.
a huge thing. It was already cut there. We spoke about this before, I think maybe a year or 2 years ago. I can't remember exactly the date, but the derogation, I think, was cut from like 250 to 220 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare or acre. And there's talks of reducing that to 170, I believe, or something along those lines. And if that happens, what will happen is either dairy farmers are going to destock number of cows. We're going to have less, you're going to have less cows in the country, which means less milk, less beef, going to probably drive beef prices potentially up again. But alternatively, what it will do, they'll have the option, basically they'll have to go, if they want to keep the cow numbers, they're going to have to find more land. So that's going to drive rental prices crazy. It already kind of has been crazy since the last derogation was cut. It'll drive me even more crazy, either from a rental or from a sale perspective. So, and that then will have a knock-on effect on tillage farmers who would potentially rent a lot of ground to grow crops that everybody needs. Every farmer needs the straw, the barley, everything. It's an ecosystem there that works. So, the more tillage farmers disappear, it's going to drive, you're going to buy in more, concentrates made in a factory somewhere, or maybe more stuff is going to have to come from overseas. It's going to cost more. So farmers are going to spend more on feed, going to spend more on fertilizer, going to spend more on straw. All those things will start to go up. So, the derogation side of things, like, look, we all know the environmental issues globally are a problem. There is, whether you believe it or not, there is some proof. Like, not everything you read is going to be true from a global warming perspective, but a lot of what you read is man-made and caused by our existence on this planet. And you can be skeptical either way, but there is parts and parts of it that are true. And we're here. We're a wealthy country, to be fair. Not everybody sees that or feels it, but we are a wealthy country from a financial perspective at the moment. And I think we've kind of, I've said this before, like global warming and environment is a global issue. And like we can do all we want to do here as the best of our ability and we'll still not stop what's coming down the tracks if the bigger countries don't play a ball. And at the moment where Ireland's position within the future of the world is going to be in food production. And at the moment, we're literally trying to drive farmers out of business by literally trying to, and Europe is part of this with nitrate irrigation. And there's a jealousy there across other farmers across Europe that Ireland had this, exemption, other countries didn't have it. So they would love to see Ireland lose that because they're jealous that they don't have it. So like there's huge, and there was huge political probably wheeling and dealing behind the scenes to keep that. And, we probably did deals with other countries to shut them up on it and do certain things for them and support them in other issues. And, and I think we're getting a little bit cynical here, maybe a little bit arrogant in these things and thinking, sure, we don't need to have good relations with our neighbors and others. You see everything is getting a little bit more extreme and we're losing this. You're like all across Europe, you see more extremes coming into European Parliament, and that's the nature of politics across the globe at the minute. So everything is there's a fine balance there. Like, do we really want to scupper our best and our most indigenous industry? On the back of, yes, there is water quality issues. There's no doubt about it, but there's a lot of those issues are not coming from farmers, and they are not even close to being resolved. Yet farmers are making small improvements. From what you can see, not as fast as they would like. But these things could take 5 or 10 years to level out. Like, so the improvements you're making now mightn't be seen in water courses for 3, 4, 5 years. So it's very, very hard to prove huge, quick improvements in a water course from my own limited experience and knowledge in that kind of space.
And Patrick, one thing that Paul and I both, and I can speak for Paul because we talk about it all the time, is Paul and I discovered the water issues and the water crisis here in Ireland through speaking to you now about 2 years ago. And you used to come on here and you were talking about the water wastage, the water crisis, the water issues, especially from a farming point of view. And I never realized, and I said to you one day, I never realized, the importance of the quality of water. We just thought it was a water tax. We just thought, oh, it was another tax. And I remember texting you saying, you've really taught me why the water issue was so important to tackle. But I thought the delivery of the message was wrong. And I said, can we start talking about the water issues and the water crisis? So Paul and I, we went down to a public meeting last week. in Innisfree, not far from you. And just like Paul said, the farmers in Cork, was it Paul, that there was 2,000 there. The community hall in Innisfree was packed to the brim. And the farmers there were given up, and rightly so, of a water waste tank was leaking, and it was going
Directly
into
into
the
the river,
river.
yeah.
It was going into the river. And they said to the politicians who were there at the public meeting, if that was farmers, if that was us, we'd be closed down, we'd be fined, and we'd be in the High Court. So the farmers are getting all the brunt of the climate change and climate issues. And really, there's really been a narrative that has been false from the media and from other people.
Sorry, Patrick, Roisin, before Patrick makes his point, Patrick Murphy is in the waiting area looking,
Yeah.
well, I just let him in. Now, sorry for interrupting there.
No, you're fine, Paul.
Yeah, I'm going to let Patrick in there now.
So, Patrick, my point being is the farmers are getting a raw deal in every sense, from the Mercosur deal, from the climate change and getting blamed for everything and that. So that has to be stopped.
Yeah, look, there's huge disinformation out there as to the sources of where our water courses are being polluted. And the one that seems to be in the media all the time, because of certain lobbies, is targeting, agriculture as being the main polluter, when in reality it's actually not. And if you look closer to home, it's actually probably our local authorities and on the back of that, our government, that are probably causing a lot of the problems due to, lack of investment in wastewater treatment plants and olden ways of literally every bit of waste was pumped into rivers. And I think there could be 30 of those systems still in place across the country. So, like, if you stopped all that in the morning, you'd see a big improvement in water quality across the country. Like, farmers aren't going spreading slurry, spreading fertilizer on top of rivers. You just can't do it. If you're within a certain area of it, you're literally, anybody could see you from the road or wherever, and you'll have the council out to you, inspecting you and doing all sorts of things. And even I think there was an individual maybe doing some works on his farm around the Innisfree area, I believe, that was in court recently. That was now look, he probably wasn't doing things like he should have been doing, but someone who thought they knew best brought it all the way to court. That farmer, I think, was fined. Farmers are literally scared to move on their land at this stage because of anybody that is looking over the hedge and thinking they know the rules and regulations that are there, and in reality, a lot of them don't. But yeah, look, it's a huge problem because our agricultural industry is so important to this country. And I know, Patrick, it's good to see. I know you spoke very well on this in the past as regards, the knock-on effect, what Irish agriculture brings to every rural town and village and county. The more we chip away at that, the more we're going to lose our soul, and we're going to lose, jobs that are linked to agriculture as well. And it's on a bit of a knife edge at the minute over the next couple of years.
Can I ask a question, Patrick?
Yep.
Okay. So for the people that are watching this now, Patrick's going to answer it. When does slurry spreading take place?
So normally it's the 15th of January in a lot of areas, give or take, up to, was this year the 15th of October, I think, or 1st of October. Depends. It's broken down into four regions, so they all have different dates.
Yeah. So in those regions, when the slurry spreading stops, is there a marked improvement then in the water?
Well, see, the thing is, and I know the point you're going to make here is that, you can be in January and the slurry spreading season opens and you could have the wettest few weeks, and that is the worst time for you to possibly spread your slurry. And that's the most possibility of it getting to your water course. Whereas actually...
But what I'm getting at is that when slurry farming doesn't take place, then obviously if they're the problem, then the water quality should jump to pristine, clear waters. That doesn't happen. That shows you that there is something else polluting the waterways, despite the poor old farmer that gets blamed the whole time. That's the problem.
Yeah. And the thing is, like, this year at the end of the close season, you had 2 weeks there that was probably the best weather for spreading slurry, but you couldn't do it because whatever reason, it's done on dates, which in reality it really should be done on weather.
Yes.
And there nearly should be, an announcement going, yes, sorry, spreading allowable for another 2 weeks due to forecast or something along those lines, if there was any sense to it. And even in
And
January when weather is wet, sorry lads, you can't spread slurry for the next few weeks. It's going to be a disaster.
And that should be
Um,
regionalised as well too, you see, Patrick. There's no management there, that the farmers have no control over this. But yet when it goes, as you said, it's the same with us. Look, we produced mussels in Roaring Water Bay, right? And there was massive rainfall over a week. And of course, everything that's on the hills that are there for weeks, it'll get washed in. Like, this isn't farming, spreading slurry, but that's a natural phenomenon. And once that's washed away and that comes off and goes in and dissipates into the water, then you're good for a good while, no matter what the rain content is. Do you know what I mean? But there is events like that. But that's down from sheep's walking the hill, cattle walking the hill. This is nature, like any animals walking the hill, deer, any other animals that's walking there that defecates on the hills, right? When the rain comes, that washes it into the waterways and it comes into the water. And then on top of that, then you have, like, we have a problem in our local village, right, with the so-called septic tanks, right? There's treatment facilities. It's just that, just concrete bunkers that stores the stuff. Then you have settlement in the bottom of the tank, and then you have an overflow depending on the amount of volume of cubic water that comes into it. But sure, we have festivals, and you have maybe 1,000 or 2,000 people coming into the village. They don't go home to use the toilets. They use them in the village, so they overload the system. So there again, that these are the things that people have to look at for developing a system instead of blaming the food producers. I seen a very good piece where everybody was being commended for what they did, the guards, the nurses, the doctors, and the tradesmen and everything else, and I was going, yeah, but the one people that weren't thanked, right, or mentioned, were the farmers and the fishing community. And you're saying, yeah, everybody does a great job, but for them to eat, survive, and keep going to do their jobs, they need food. And the food producer is the one that feeds everybody. And nobody seems to realize that if we start getting rid of the people that we are growing and producing our food for us, then we're subject to an interference with the food supply later on. And somebody said to me, they said, but if you have contracts and if you have deals done like the Mercosur agreement, the food will come in. Well, we had the same agreements during COVID with different companies from around the world and Europe for providing plastic and PPE gear for people inside our hospitals. But when the pandemic struck, Italy, who was to provide us with our PPE, needed it for their own people. So they stopped shipping, even though there was contracts in place. And this was serious. So it's the same for our food. If the food stops coming into our country because other countries need it, what are we going to do without it? 1%, they keep saying, of our flour is produced in Ireland. We don't produce sugar anymore. So, and that goes into all foods. I know people, I don't take sugar in my coffee, but it goes into a lot of other foods. So we're at the mercy of imports, and it's going to be the same right across the board for our farmers. Blaming them for something that, if you actually evaluated their land and the amount of grass and the carbon sequestration that goes on in photosynthesis, they'd be being paid for what they do. Do you know? It's not right the way that the system is calculated on carbon, that the people that have the place to sequester the carbon then is also crucified for rearing animals and food. And the figures are all calculated incorrectly, in my view.
How do we solve this as a farmer and a fisherman, and who know your industry inside out? How do we solve the issue of not being self-sufficient enough and not supporting our farmers and fishermen the way we should be to actually be self-sufficient with our food supply?
Can we start on that one? It's there's multiple different things. I think as a country, look, as a former politician, I can say, I think we have overregulated this country and everybody is scared to make a decision, and politicians have basically handed off the decision-making processes away from themselves. At the end of the day, anyone who's elected to office should have the power to make an actual decision and not have some all these other committees and semi-state bodies, wherever they may be, kind of feeding in all this stuff and kind of pushing everything down the tracks to other people who are actually unelected and don't necessarily. I just think politics has lost its soul completely. There's nobody there that's actually willing to make a decision, an actual decision, because everybody seems to digest their stuff from social media. There's no reality of what's actually how the world works and operates. Like, food is key to everything at the end, food and water, that's life. And, nobody's understands what's going outside of this little social media bubble, and politicians are living in it as well. And it's like they're basing their whole policy, from what I can see, on what they see in Twitter on every day. And I'm going like, I think there's such a silent majority of people there in this country that and you see a little bit in the presidential election, the spoil the vote thing, while I don't think it's as big a thing as what some would like to make it out to be, it's like people are going, who actually is on our side? Because it's definitely not the current government. It's definitely not the opposition, because they're speaking some absolute mad stuff. And it's like, even if you look at Renewa 15 years ago or so, did it come 15 years too soon? Like a party on that kind of, center right. I know Aintu are starting to make traction. They'll be that potential party in the next election. Can they make those huge? Is there that much disenfranchised people that will actually, don't want to vote for the left, don't want to vote for the existing government? Is there a party there that can manipulate it and take over, win that support? But like it's, just like farmers have been taken for granted for so long, and farmers have always been, good team players, will always, row in behind the best for the country. But at this stage, if I just don't get the main political parties like literally not doubling down behind farmers at every opportunity. I just don't get it. Now the Mercosur thing is starting to, but they're talking about Mercosur for 30 odd years and they're all on our side. But there's just the day-to-day stuff, like, is just, they've let little things go all the time, and it's been a step by 1,000 cuts for the agricultural community and the fishing community that Patrick would know. And it's this stage, it's like, if they keep going the way they're going, there's going to be nothing left. And then we'll be in a sorry position as a country. And, we should be proud of what we have here. And, where is the stomach to really shoot down some of this misinformation is out there on our food production and everything that goes along with it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You make a very good point there, Patrick. Particularly around our politics and our inability to make decisions. If you go on just to be maybe a good exercise for people, if you go on the President of Ireland website, they'll show you the number of bills that the president has signed into law in 2025. If you compare it to last year, the year before, it's night and day. So you do have to ask your question: what is actually happening at a government level, and our decisions, are they being made or can they not be made?
Well, we gave over a lot of the decision making to Europe, to be honest with you, and the regulations and the directives that are coming from Europe. Like, we're talking about billions of euros now being foisted upon the Irish people in fines for not meeting our carbon targets. But when we signed up to them, we didn't have the population that we have now. So it wasn't based on population. So, of course, everybody that comes into the country is going to put on the lights, put on the fire, drive around. They're going to use carbon. Like, I don't know if people realize, but there's 200 million euros, worth of carbon being given to the foreign boats that are putting into our ports. So they come in, they buy the diesel, and then they get a rebate back they put in for it. But we get cut for the carbon footprint for that. Imagine 200 million euros. So, like, how many litres of diesel is that? Do you know what I mean? So the system is broken for the Irish people. We're the greenest country in Europe, genuinely, per capita, per mile. And yet we seem to have way bigger targets than others. Look at the city of London, like, how many million people are living inside in that? Where's the greenway there? Look at the carbon that's expended in that city in a year in comparison to Ireland, like. And yet, and we can go right across Europe in the cities, it's crazy. like I was asked the question myself. We had animals on our farm, but my father died, so we had to get rid of the animals to go through probate and everything else. But I haven't had an animal on our farm for 5 years. And where is the figures for that being taken into consideration? Every year the grass grows, the furze grows. You know, there's carbon sequestering naturally occurring inside in that land. There's part of it is a bog, but there's no accountability for that going into the system to write off our carbon um, bill, is what I would say. The system is all wrong in the way we calculate it. And we've spoken to ministers about this. The same with the seas. I'm going to finish on this point now for this one anyway. We're told by the NGOs about how much carbon trawlers kick up. They're saying that it's the same amount of carbon that airplanes spend in the air. Fine. Sure, if there's that much carbon and there's that much money, then I guarantee a fisherman will gladly cut down on his fishing activity outside. Or if you pay him for the carbon sequestering, that he'll do by not fishing. And this is where we need to go. So if there's figures for that, and we can actually show that there's no fishing inside in an area or an MPA, then look for the money for that to meet our fines and do it that way. You know, there's other ways of doing it. And like we're talking about planting trees and forestry and everything else, but sure, a shrub or a hedgerow has as much carbon sequestering as any tree, you know, and it's natural and indigenous to our country rather than putting up evergreen trees, like, you know. That poisoned the land in around the Baltic and poisoning the seas there, making it pure acidic with all those trees. So like when we're talking about nature, sometimes we do things that actually hurt us rather than help us. But I think Pat is right. I think politicians don't want to make decisions, and they don't seem to be responsible for the wastage is there now. It's a case of, well, we've got plenty of money, so we can cover it up, or we can throw it at this or throw it at that. What happens today when that money shifts? And I don't say it's gone, but shifts, goes somewhere else, or another country takes the businesses that we have. And the backbone of our country that we had since we became independent was farming and fishing. And sure, we won't have that. You know, it's not going to be there in our rural communities. Like the smaller farmers going to be pushed out. You'll have a few big ones, all right, but there'll be no fishing. I can guarantee you that. We have around 220 million of an earning in fishing last year. That's down by 94 million now next year. So what industry can sustain those reductions like and stay going? And the cure for that, what ails you, was to wipe out the boats since the last 20-21 years. So are we going to keep going until we genuinely see that there's no more fishing being done by Irish people, and the same for our farming? We have to get real, and the public need to know what's happening to their resources, to their country, to the future of their next generations, because we've seen what happened in the buildings. We had a problem. We had too many houses. We went bust. And people, remember, they were knocking houses. They said, you know, we were knocking them after the crash. And now we can't build them fast enough. Why? Because we got rid of our builders. We destroyed a perfectly good industry with a knee-jerk reaction. And I think we're going to do the exact same thing to our farming and fishing.
And how do we stop that?
It's like just on Patrick's last point there on the construction side of it. It's like the way it is at the moment. Like there's plenty of people there willing to build houses if the environment was right. But it's like, God forbid the developer made a profit. My God, if he made a profit, it's like the worst thing in the world that could happen to anybody. And a landlord, God bless, he gets a month's rent off someone. It's like the worst thing. And like we're creating this weird utopia where nobody should, you know, this public good of doing things for nothing should exist, and that never works in any country that has ever happened in. We, you know, encouraging companies to grow and build and develop, and you know, God, yeah, fair play to someone who's able to go in and build 1,000 houses. There's 1,000 families, and God forbid he makes a few quid out of it. Fair play to him. Like this is we've like every policy that seems to come in from a housing perspective is like, you know, the government has no chance of building houses because they've created a system where every Tom, Dick, and Harry can just say no to this, that, and the other. So developers don't want to know about it. Then when they get going, there's all sorts of things that get in their way. Then they're not allowed to make money. Like it's complete madness. Like if you want these houses to be built, take away a lot of the pain points that are there from a planning perspective, and actually, let these guys make a few quid. If they make a few quid, they'll build the houses, and everyone will have a chance to. Prices might start to drop, and there might be an opportunity there. But it's like. It's just and the covenant if the opposition get in, God blesses what they might do. Like if they're what they're talking about, like there's nobody going to go near building a house because it's just not going to and where Usher will build them, the state will build them, but sure, where are you going to get the people to build them? They're not there, and it's like it's just complete madness. Like there's so many simple things that could change with the right attitude and a bit of stomach from a decision making perspective in 5 years could turn around so much here. And like, it's the thing is politicians are chasing certain votes that will never vote for them anyway. It's like they think this is what they should be doing. In reality, 40% of people might ever consider voting for Fine Gael. Maybe 45% or 50% maybe someday might consider voting Fianna Fáil. The other 50 or 60% would never vote for you in a million years. No, you could literally hand them £1,000,000 and they'd never vote for you. Like that's just their mindset and their lean a different way. And no matter what you do for them, they're unlikely to support you. So, if these parties are serious about staying in power, they should be supporting that 40 to 50% that will on any given day vote for them as a first priority if they felt they're being looked after. And then, you can build and you can, where at the moment they're just destroying their own vote, allowing the opposition to come in, and probably next election, God knows what way things will look. But yeah, like nothing seems to make sense anymore from a look, politicians are there to make decisions for the best will of all our people, and I think Irish politicians always have been that way. But at the moment, there's just this thing of, well, let's do stuff that is going to affect our supporters, but it will make everyone else happy, but they're still not happy. Your supporters are not happy, and nobody's happy. So it's just like, at the end of the day, politics is politics. If you want to be in power, you want to make decisions. Like that's that's what you're being elected to do. And there's, I've said this before, there's enough politicians in it all that don't ever want to go into government or don't ever make a decision because it doesn't suit their narrative. And those lads should all be kicked out the minute, if you haven't gone into government within 10 years or tried to within 15 years, the people in those areas should say good luck to you if you're not going to go in and actually make a difference to our lives. That's the reality of it.
Well, Sinn
Right.
Féin did have the opportunity and the left to have a coalition with the left in 2020, and they didn't take it. So they did have that opportunity. And you talked about that 55%. When you think the 55, and you mentioned the spoiled vote, when you think the spoiled vote was 13%, and then if you add on the Jim Gavin, it was 7%. But there is still that cohort of voters at 55% of people that didn't go out and vote. They're the people who are disenfranchised and really disgusted. Again, there isn't the people making them decisions. There isn't people looking after our farming, our fisheries, our building contractors, our housing, and all the defense forces, the navy, and everything else. We want people to go in, as you said, and make decisions. Is it that they can't make decisions because all the decisions are made in Europe? And then if we say, well, let's bring the decision making back to Ireland, and then your class is anti-Europe and pro-nationalism. So where do we get that balance?
We do what's right, Roisin. It's as simple as that. We do what's right, and we have to protect our own indigenous people, first. And you can be called a racist for that. It's incredible inside your own country that if you speak up for Irish nationalism, right, and our heritage and everything else, you're labelled straight away, and it's absolute lunacy. And I'll explain why. I, as a young person, spent a lot of my time in school raising money and funds for the less off all around the world, right? We sent people all over the globe ourselves. We genuinely did. But there's hundreds of thousands of people now struggling in this country and homeless. This is the figures. And instead of securing yourself, we keep mixing it up. So, of course, there's an awful lot of responsibility, I believe, in the media. 100%. Like, you know, they came down on top of, definitely politicians, one day, good day, you praise them, another day, you do bad. And that's what you're meant to do, right? So the Taoiseach came out and he said, look, we were struggling with the amount of people coming into the country. Now, he made a faux pas. He said migrants, like, but you know what he meant. But he was jumped upon, like, and the media savaged him. You know, like, I don't know, did they give him a chance to go into the interviews to correct that? But a blind person could see what's going on here, like, and it's wrong, right? So we go from, you know, oh, it's wrong to label people and call people names, and yet the people that are saying that are doing the labeling and calling the people names, like, and I think Pat is right. Politicians now are afraid of that. They don't know, Jesus, if I say this, I'll be crucified. If I say that, I'll be crucified. Do you know, you've even comedians and people coming out and saying, you know, like John Cleese apologising for Monty Python, do you know, in a sarcastic way, like, you know, oh, I'm so sorry, lads, if only I knew what was happening in 40 years' time, I would never have done it. And, you know, there has, so what do we do? Well, do we want to produce food in our own country? Do we want the right to catch fish around our shores? Do we want to have our young people living in rural Ireland? You know, do we want to train our kids instead of everybody into a college there, lads? If you don't, you know, I'll put it to you like this. When I grew up, if you were a fisherman, you were looked down upon. Genuinely, you were looked down upon until the 90s and the noughties, and they seen fishermen were doing well, making money, and suddenly, oh Jesus, he's rich and he's loaded. Oh, the fecker. Then it was a case that sure he's catching it all for free. He's going out, feck him anyway. So it was another way of putting him down. Now it's a case of Jesus, they're destroying the planet. They're outside and they're catching fish, but they're actually improving on their fishing methods. You know, they're reducing the gear, the bottom contact. They're constantly modifying their gear to avoid catching the fish that they're not allowed to catch. That's the reality of it. And it's the same in the farming community. Like, if you looked at the modernization that farming has gone through in the last 30 years, a fella 30 years ago, I think he was on another planet. The better practices and what lads are doing and looking after animal health and, you know, making sure their animals are fine, and yet they're being crucified now. It's beyond belief. So I think that what we need is we need proper education in our schools and everything else, and take the narrative out that's been forced upon people now, and the narrative that a cow is more deadly than the exhaust of a car or a chimney. Like, it's ridiculous, and the kids are being told this, like, it's being drilled into them. And I promise you, right up to I had this story with so many people, and this isn't just exclusive to Ireland now. So we had a Cypriot class that came to Clonakilty, and one of the teachers, an Irish girl, asked me to come in and talk about fishing and farming in front of them, like. And I asked that simple question. I said, you know, chimney, an exhaust of a pipe, and a cow, which is doing more damage to the environment? And they said the cow. And I said, really? Do you honestly believe that a cow? And they said, yeah. And I said, but like, I'll give you the test. Go into a room with a cow, right, for a night, and see, will you come out in the morning? Go in and leave a car running inside in the garage and sit inside it. Will you come out in the morning? Or stick your head down a chimney and see how long you last. And like, you know, and then they kind of think and they look at you and they, no, you're wrong. And you're going, this is brain fog, you know, this is force. That's where we have to. So we have to get back to reality, as Pat says, and our politicians have to stop trying to be populist and get ticks and likes and TikTok and on Facebook, and get back to the politics that are at hand.
And also, Patrick, there's a false narrative out there as well that you dealt with there a while back here on this program, where we're saying that it's Irish boats that are overfishing, and it's clearly not, because they don't have the quotas to do that. And in fact, it's other countries that are doing it, particularly Norway, and that's going to have a big impact on mackerel quotas here in Ireland, massively.
Yeah, just to give people an understanding that's listening to this. So people complain about, you know, the biggest boats in Ireland, that they're overfishing, and look at the size of them and everything else. But they can go up to Killybegs, right, or down to Castletownbere, and they'll see them at the pier for most of the year. And I mean most of the year. So they're there for at least 11 months. Now, I had a meeting tonight with the Department of Marine. Sorry, excuse me for being late, right? And you know what we were discussing? We were discussing whether we could give the full authorization of fish at the start of the year, right? Because there could be an overshoot last year that if people went above, you will pay it back. You never go above what you're allowed to, but you can have provision to take a little bit more from next year on the calendar year, right? So you can and pay it back the following year. So, and the lads were talking, well, it won't pay me now to go out and fish if I don't get the 100% because 50 tons won't do it. So I can't steam up to the Shetlands for 50 ton, but I could go up there for 100. That's one trip. So when you're accusing somebody in those boats overfishing, they go for one trip. They're up and down in a week. That's it. They're finished. You know, whereas you can see on AIS and VMS, you know, these are the things on marine traffic, and you can see all the other countries' boats. Anytime, just go into the app and see it. And you'll see these boats around the coastline the whole time. And our boats are tied to the pier wall. So you're dead right. We don't. We have 15% of the fish, and we had the Oireachtas committee today. And in fairness to the lads that were on the Fisheries and Maritime committee, they asked questions, and it's all over the social media now. Where the representative, the head man inside there, I won't name him, that would be unfair, of the SFPA, and all that he's saying is no, can't answer that. No, won't be going there. Won't be answering that. They've taken out the clips, and it's nearly 5 minutes of clips. Now, the man was right in it, by the way. There is a legal impediment from him to speak about certain things inside there. But isn't it frustrating that you bring somebody in and you ask them questions and they say, I'd love to answer that, but I can't because the law is saying that I can't go near it. Yet, as they pointed out, it didn't apply for cases that they had won. So they had no problem in commenting on their websites and out in the media and paying papers to print it and everything else when some poor fella got crucified. And I'm gonna say one more point in that, you know, about data and stuff like this, right? So he was asked about the amount of inspections that they did in one fleet over another, and he came in. He said, "Well, we did 53% on the foreign boats coming into Killybegs. We did 15% on non-boats coming into Killybegs, you know, from outside, and then the Irish were around 30%, right? And you know, I was going, that doesn't sound right at all. So then, when it was teased out, it was a case of, well, that was the percentage of their boats that landed. So when you broke it down by boats, then there was 30 Irish boats inspected, 5 of the foreign boats that made up to 53%, and 1 of the other boats. So do you understand how you can interpret figures like? So which would you think was inspected more, the 30 Irish boats or the 6 foreign boats?
30 Irish.
30 Irish boats.
But you see, initially, without digging into the data, it wasn't. It was the foreign boats, because on the percentage on the métier that he picked to evaluate it was on their landings in regard to the other boats that had landed. So it was based on landings, not boats fishing, not boats catching inside their waters, or how much each individual boat had. So it depended on which way you looked at the statistics. And like anybody I know would say, well, there was 30 Irish boats, so that means there was 30 inspections. You did 5 and the other one, so that's 6 ratio to 30. So, you know, it's definitely 5 times more. So that would be 80% to the Irish and 20% to the foreign boats. You know, that's the way I would have done it. Or maybe a little less, 75 or 76, 24. But that would be the way I'd say. 74% inspections to the Irish, 24 to the others. But no, not at all. So I think the same is happening here. Coming back to your question, what do? We tell the truth, we look at the figures, and I genuinely don't think the figures are being calculated correctly. And one of the things that I feel, I don't know for certain, is that when a cow is calculated of the carbon that it emits, right, it's based on the body and the amount going, but the grass that they eat is only counted once. But every time the grass is eaten, it has to replenish and it takes in. And if God or anybody else was designing a perfect, sustainable circle of life, well, the cow eats the grass feeds the cow puts out the gases that the grass eats. So it's a pure circle, circle of life. Do you know what I mean? And the cow we'll say shits, right? And the cow shit, cow pats, that gives the nutrients back into the grass and the ground to regrow again, and the other animals and worms and everything else. Like what better system could you describe than that? That's completely circular.
Yeah. It's been around for millions of years.
Yeah. And the thing is, Paul brought it to my attention recently. We were off the door, and we've always been talking about guaranteed Irish supporting our farmers and fishermen. And Paul, we have a little spot outside Bushwells where we do our recording. Paul says, "Look, Roisin, there's guaranteed Irish just down, I mean, like 25 feet or 20 feet from the gates of Dáil Éireann." And yet, people want to support Ireland. We want everything to Irish. We want to go back to the 80s, where there is a government campaign of guaranteed Irish with a G and the labels on it. Support Irish farmers, support Irish food producers, support Irish fisheries. We find that astounding. We keep saying it to all the politicians we're interviewing. Look, there's guaranteed Irish across the street. No one knows that they're in Mosley Street, just across the road from Dáil Éireann. We want to move on quickly because we know we're coming up over the hour. And let me see if I get this right. The compulsive purchase order. The farmers are now being threatened with. Gentlemen, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's again, I haven't drilled into in huge detail, but just seeing from what I believe, it's like, greenways and all these new, agri-tourism, you could potentially call them. Like we have a local river walk that passes through our land here, and I'm genuinely very supportive of it. I've always, it's great. It's great for the locals to be able to walk. You can walk all the way to Kilkenny, start in Bennettsbridge where we are. But, because of what's happened in Irish farming over the last 10, 15 years, farmers do not want people on their land because of nosy people who basically think they know best. So farmers now have become very concerned about greenways, walkway, all these things. But now, there's threats now of, councils or government coming in and CPOing their land in these areas to make these greenways. So I suppose a bit of context, there's probably numerous greenways across the country, and now they're looking to expand on these, maybe to connect them, make them longer, so that they might bring more people to them if they're a bit longer. So like Kilkenny, they're trying to connect like from the south all the way to the north if they can in some way, shape or form. And makes sense on paper. But the people you need to bring this along are the farmers. Yeah. And if everyone's against the farmers are not going to play ball. They're not going to let people onto their land. So they're not going to voluntarily agree to the scheme. So the only route that these organizations have now is to maybe try and CPO the land. So farmers are obviously up in arms. And Pat, you might know a bit more about it from your work in Brussels and bits and pieces and hear a bit more, but it's that's my kind of understanding of it.
Yeah, to me, no, I'll just give you a story, right? And I'm all in favour of walkways and around towns and places like that and access to the countryside. But I'm not in favour of people who are resistant to that, or they have fears that it's cutting straight through the land, right? And this is what's happening. And just think, you have animals inside in fields. These fences, right? And people will be going up to animals or bulls or anything else. It'll be the farmer that'll be caught for this. It'll only take one animal to injure somebody, and then you're in serious trouble. You can imagine what a farmer will have to do. He'll have to put up probably a secondary fence in back of the other fence. This is the reality of it. But I'll tell you a funny story. I was coming down from Killybegs, long drive now. It's 7 hours up, 7 hours down. And here I am on the road next time, just looking at these fellas, and I'm shaking the head and I'm going, Jesus Christ, lads, cop on. So inside was the greenway and the cycle path. And where were these fellas? 3 abreast out on the road. I'm just going, holy God, like, why they couldn't cycle inside the path that was designed for them. So, this is, so if you're doing that as well, then there should be an obligation on people to use them, and definitely in that scenario that I seen, I don't know why they were on the road, but maybe they wanted to be 3 abreast, maybe the cycle lane. And I'm talking about a perfectly tarred, walkway now was inside the road. That was the greenway, and they're not using it. So other queries then and questions in the planning. So you have a greenway and it stops at maybe 5 or 6 miles out of the town, right? So if you walk it, then you'll have to turn around and come back because there was no parking at the end of it. You know, they took away the car park because they didn't want the cars there. They said, oh, you could walk. So this type of unjointed thinking, but the main thing is people's property and their right to enjoy their own land and to make a living from it, which I believe is protected under the Constitution, right?
Absolutely.
You're entitled to enjoy your property and make a living from it. So you're going back to history, right? And I know this is terrible to be saying it, but the last time we were kicked off the land, it was Cromwell. Wouldn't it be terrible now that our government is taking land away from people because other people want to walk on it or cycle on it? You know,
Yeah.
there is plenty of new roads being built that you could put the walkways along that. As Pat said, make the decisions like, and if people say, oh God, that'd be too long. If you're going out to get exercise in the country, the longer the better. Do you know what I mean? Whereas to try and cut a fella's farm up and cut it right through the middle. Like Pat, you've said that your farm is alongside the waterway, so yes,
Yeah.
you lose a section of your land, but it doesn't interfere, does it, with the farming? Like,
No,
imagine
no,
if it was
no.
through the middle of the field.
Yeah, the only thing about it, like, and look, I've no, it's really, really good. It's a great facility for the locality,
Yeah.
and but we look down on the river from our house, and you can see people walking there, and there's number one, there's supposed to be no dogs on it, but of course there's dogs on it. So I can look down, and then there's no whenever a dog on a leash, there's dogs not on leashes, and the dogs are there's only one strand of electric wire, so the dogs are out in the field with the cattle doing whatever they want to do, defecating, so I had a couple of issues here on farm this year with certain things and got bloods done on certain cows, and like Neospora showed up in some of these blood, which is basically a disease caused by, dog poo with certain worms, etc., that can cause abortions and stuff in animals. Now, look, it could easily be foxes and other things. It's not definite that it was these dogs, but so I did say it to the walks crew. I said, look, could we do something a bit more concrete from a fence perspective to stop the dogs at least getting out through the fence? But the fact is, in a floodplain and a river, there's not a whole lot you can do because everything's just going to get stuck in a fence and break it to pieces anyway the minute it floods. So you're kind of coupling a rock and a hard place. You want the facility there for people to use and to enjoy and get the health benefits out of it. But people get comfortable and get a little bit abusive of it, and you kind of go, well, there was one crowd on this walk that did close their land to it a few years ago because they were threatened on their land by individuals with dogs, and fair play to them, they did the right thing. But that they now have to come up and onto the road and back around and go around their land. And the more people take advantage of these and kind of don't maybe play by and respect the land that they're on. I know it's fenced off, but still beside an active and working farm. Farmers are going to go, well, eventually you'll push the wrong button and the farmer will close it up and away, because they're not CPO, they're still voluntary. Like we take part in it, we get a bit of money to maintain our portion of it. But we could easily shut that down if you felt that things weren't going according to plan. So you would just say nicely to people, look, if you're using something like this in a rural area, just be respectful of where you are. It doesn't, you're getting a good service and something that's good for the locality. Don't abuse it. Follow the rules. Like, if you're not supposed to be dogs, there shouldn't be dogs. But at least if you bring a dog, geez, have the dog on a leash, at least. You don't need a dog running after livestock, or, I don't think people understand what their dog doing their business on a farm in a field with cattle could actually, what damage that could cause to a farmer's income. They don't actually, probably none of them have a clue of the knock-on consequences of that.
Yeah.
So, well, look, it's great. It does have some of its downfalls as well. But for now, I don't ever see myself shutting it down. But you'd like people to take to be a bit more copped on when they're using the walk.
I would
Yeah,
never have known
sorry.
that. And I thought my dog passed away now a couple of years ago, but I would never ever have thought about my dog's poop when you in the field or in a pathway that it could affect and kill or harm cattle. So there's something that we knew that should be made available. Even Paul, we must start talking about that. Poop and scoop if you're out even out walking and that is supporting our farmers.
Because Roisin, I read a really good quote from Willie Aird. He's a Fine Gael TD in Leash, and he's also a farmer himself. He said the success of these projects depends on cooperation, not coercion. So I think that really sums the whole thing up, I think.
Well, gentlemen, we've gone past the hour, and we want to really thank him because you're two of our favourites here on the Irish Political Roundup. You've really supported him. We'll get you. Hopefully, we'll get the calendars right and get you back on again very shortly. And because Paul and I have learned so much. I knew nothing about anything to do with agriculture. I still don't know, but at least I'm a little bit more informed now and everything. And especially as well, the fisheries and our water waste treatments and our quality of water and our water crisis. We learned on this program from you both, and we really appreciate that.
I just want to say that because of the next politician, right? I do want to acknowledge, if they're watching, the MEPs in Brussels that met with the fishing industry to understand the crisis that we're in. As I said, no industry is set to lose more or less half of its income in the next calendar year, and it's devastating for the industry, especially when a lot of it was caused by other people. So maybe some of these MEPs are looking. They might join you some night, Roisin, and we can discuss it further. But there's a real fight ahead now in Brussels for our fishing industry and for the future, and genuinely the future of a lot of young families. And I mean young, because the older fellas will be leaving. We'll be trying to get the young ones in. And there mightn't be a future there or an opportunity for them to get into the industry if things keep going the way they're going.
Well, let's send out an invitation then to the MEPs and see who comes back. We'll definitely do that.
Okay.
Patrick O'Neill and Patrick Murphy, thank you once again from our hearts for coming on and supporting the Irish Political Roundup.